Backed by Ray Benson and Asleep at the Wheel, Brennen Leigh made a record of original Western swing music. She called it Obsessed with the West. She shared her story about making the album with us right here on the Texas Music Scene.
I traveled all over this whole wide world playing songs for smiling faces. From Idaho to old Oslo and 1,000 other places. I've rode on trains and aerial planes, ate steak in calamari. Shook the hands of diplomats and played their fancy parties. Well, I don't mean to gripe or brag, sure the high life has been grand, but I'd trade my wage just to be on stage in Texas with the band.
All right.
I grew up with Western swing. My mom and dad had Asleep at the Wheel records and Bob Wills records. So I had this sort of fantasy about Texas, that it was this place where everyone just played Western swing and ate Mexican food, and that to an extent was true. I always admired what Ray and the Wheel were doing. They were these progressive, kind of hippie vibe folks, but they were, they are Western swing and American music, sort of Ray's an expert on that. And he has his entire career managed to keep it totally fresh.
If I only had one final wish, I'd make it my demand.
What's that?
To play once more to a sawdust floor in Texas with a band.
For some reason, I just went through a phase, and I was listening to all those Bob Wills, Tiffany transcriptions, and I was listening to Tommy Duncan solo records. And when Sam called me about maybe making a record, I was like, well, how about we make a Western swing album? And I thought he would roll his eyes like, we do that all the time, but they were into it. I wrote 12 songs, new Western swing songs for the project. And that was a challenge because I was kind of using Cindy Walker, who wrote a lot of Bob Wills' hits, as a sort of spirit guide for the writing, and I was using Tommy Duncan as my model for the singing, and both of those things are completely unachievable.
I've been sober 15 years. I walk a real straight line. But if Tommy Duncan's voice was booze, I'd stay drunk all the time.
Paul Kramer and I wrote If Tommy Duncan's Voice Was Booze together. We name-check Tommy Duncan, who's like my favorite singer. Paul got the idea because I was telling him that listening to Tommy Duncan was like drinking a chocolate milkshake. His voice is like cooling and sweet and just so smooth. I clam up actually talking about it because he was just a huge influence on me as a young person. And funny enough, people haven't heard of him. He was, probably the best known singer of Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys. But when I mention him on stage, I've noticed that people don't immediately recognize about who I'm speaking about. I wanted to give him a little nod on the record.
Cottonwood fuzz, light as a feather, soft as the summer nights that we spent together. If I can't stop smiling, honey, it's because love's floating on the air like cottonwood fuzz.
Another interesting thing about the way Ray produces is there's no real pre-production involved. We just have some demos I made with my guitar, and he just would sit down with the band and the tape's rolling and, hey, let's just play this one and see what happens. We kind of just dove into each song and went with what felt best. Getting to work with Ray and the band was probably the most fun I've ever had in the studio.
I'm obsessed with the West, that ruleless old gal, always coming or going, she can't be corralled.
Obsessed with the West is a song that I wouldn't really call Western swing. It's one of the kind of outliers on the record that, in my heart, it's kind of more of a cowboy tune. It's got this wistful thing about the American West, which is, to me, just the big wide open space west of the Mississippi. I have a spiritual connection with that part of the country, and I wrote a poem for it, which was obsessed with the West, and it just ended up being a song, turned it into a song later. It's really just sort of a profession of love. I decided a while back that, it sounds corny, but following your heart as an artist is a really important thing to do. Because if you're trying to be popular or reach a certain audience, you're kind of shooting at a moving target. What I've noticed is that if I'm sort of true to myself and I just do what I want to do here and here, other people will actually relate more than they would if I were trying to somehow pander to them.
Now I change out of these Western clothes and clock out my time card and ride off onto Sunset Boulevard.